Some nights don't shatter with noise, they break you with silence. And if you've been feeling drained, unimportant, or ready to give up, you already know exactly what that silence feels like. It's the moment when life stops pretending and asks you the question you've been avoiding. Do you still believe your story matters? In this video, I'll take you back to Denmark, where everything in me almost collapsed, and where I discovered the last page I wasn't ready to turn. The night everything cracked. Most stories don't warn you before they break. They just split open in the middle of an ordinary moment. That night in Copenhagen was exactly like that. Nothing dramatic, nothing cinematic. Just me, a too quiet street, and a sky that looked like someone had dimmed the world on purpose. You'd think a city famous for happiness would feel warm, but there I was standing outside a closed bakery at 9 p.m., realizing I didn't recognize myself anymore. There's a strange kind of panic that doesn't make you run, it freezes you. My brain wasn't shouting. It was whispering. Whispering things like, "Why are you even here? And when did you become this tired?" That's the part nobody talks about. Sometimes the moment that cracks you isn't loud. It's the moment so soft it almost feels kind. I remember watching my reflection in the bakery window. It felt like meeting a distant cousin I'd heard about but never met. Someone who looked like me but carried a weight I'd never admitted. And right then a ridiculous thought hit me. If someone wrote my story tonight, would anyone even turn the page? The question wasn't dramatic. It was honest. And honesty can be cruel. That a bike passed by. Its light slicing through the dark like a reminder that the world was moving even if I wasn't. I felt both invisible and too exposed at the same time. That's the funny thing about breaking points. They don't ask for permission. They don't check your schedule. They don't care if you're trying your best. They just arrive, sit beside you, and start unpacking the feelings you've been pretending not to carry. And in that moment, I realized something painfully simple. My life had become a story I was reading, not writing. I was letting days happen to me instead of choosing them. And once you notice that truth, you can't unsee it. The crack wasn't the end. It was the first time I truly heard myself. A country of quiet streets. Denmark has a way of pretending to be simple. You arrive thinking it's all bikes, pastries, and people who smile like they've mastered life. But once you step off the plane and actually live there, you realize something else. The silence isn't peaceful. It's loud. Almost too loud. The streets are so calm, so perfectly arranged, it feels like the whole country is whispering, "Don't mess up the symmetry." During my first weeks, I walked through neighborhoods where even the houses looked disciplined. Windows lined up like straight-A students. Gardens trimmed with the precision of someone who definitely irons their socks. Everyone seemed to know exactly where they were going, exactly who they were, exactly what they were doing with their lives. Meanwhile, I was just trying to remember which bus stop didn't abandon me in the middle of nowhere. Here's the thing nobody warns you about. Being surrounded by order when your heart feels chaotic makes the chaos louder. I'd sit on benches along the canals, watching people glide by on their bikes like they were born knowing the choreography of life. And there I was, an accidental extra in a film that didn't need me. The quiet was supposed to be comforting, but instead, it pressed against me like a truth I wasn't ready to handle. One morning, a woman brushed past me on the street and murmured something I didn't catch. She smiled, gentle and brief, then moved on. For some reason, that tiny moment made something twist inside me. It wasn't what she said. It was how effortlessly she belonged here. I felt like a puzzle piece from the wrong box. Same shape, Wrong picture that I wish I could say I tried to fit in gracefully. But the truth is, I spent more time trying to shrink, trying not to disturb the delicate balance of those quiet Danish streets. It's funny how a place that looks soft can make you feel so sharp-edged. The more I walked, the more I felt like everything around me was speaking a language I couldn't imitate. Not words, but a kind of inner steadiness. And slowly, painfully, I started to realize the streets weren't the ones that made me feel lost. I was already lost before I ever arrived. The winter that froze me. Winter in Denmark doesn't simply arrive. It sneaks in like a quiet intruder, turning the world dim 1 minute at a time. By December, the sun was basically a rumor, something people talked about but no one actually saw. And when the darkness settles that early, it does something to your mind. You start counting the hours not by daylight, but by how long you can stay awake without feeling like a ghost of yourself. There was one particular evening when the cold felt almost personal, like it had memorized my name. I stepped outside my apartment and the air slapped me so sharply it felt like the universe was saying, "Go back inside, you fragile little human." But I kept walking because sometimes you'd rather brave the cold than sit alone with the noise inside your head. The streets were nearly empty, snow piled neatly as if someone had arranged it with a ruler. I stood by the lake near Nørrebro, watching the surface freeze into a sheet so smooth it looked unreal. That frozen surface felt like a metaphor I didn't ask for. My emotions locked beneath something I couldn't break. I tried to breathe deeply, but the cold punched the breath right out of me. Winter has a way of making even breathing feel like work. People always imagine loneliness as loud crying or dramatic collapses. But the real loneliness? It's quieter. It's making tea in a kitchen where the kettle's whistle sounds too loud. It's sitting on a couch and realizing no one knows where you are at that exact moment. It's hearing footsteps outside and wishing, just for a second, that one of them was coming for you. One night, I caught myself staring at the frost on my window longer than any normal person should. The ice crystals spread like tiny maps, branching into places I couldn't name. And I thought, if my heart were a window, would it look like this too? Frozen. Patterned. Beautiful maybe, but cold. It was during that winter that I stopped pretending everything was fine. I wasn't okay. And Denmark, with all its calm perfection, didn't hide that truth, it magnified it. Winter didn't break me. It simply showed me the cracks I'd been ignoring. The stranger who saw me. There are moments in life when someone you've never met somehow looks straight into the part of you you've spent months trying to hide. For me, that moment happened in a nearly empty cafe in Osterbro. One of those places where the lights are soft, the pastries are expensive, and everyone whispers like they're in a library with better bread. I was sitting alone at a corner table, pretending to read a book I wasn't actually reading. My mind was everywhere else, mostly looping through the same quiet fear. What if this version of me is permanent? And that's when a stranger, maybe in her late 50s, asked if she could take the empty chair at my table. She didn't look like someone who'd changed my night. She looked like someone who owned too many scarves. She sat down, sipped her coffee, and after a moment that felt suspiciously intentional, she said, "You look like someone who's been holding their breath for a very long time." I swear my heart forgot its job for a second and I tried to laugh it off. I said something like, "Long winter, I guess." But she shook her head gently, as if winter had nothing to do with what she saw. "No," she said. "That's not the kind of cold you fix with warmer clothes." It was unsettling. How calmly she said it, How casually she nicked open the truth I'd been wrapping in layers of silence. She didn't ask questions. She didn't pry. She just watched me the way someone watches a candle that's almost gone out, half hoping, half waiting. After a while, she shared something unexpected. How she once moved to another country, how she felt small for months, how she hid her fear behind productivity and polite smiles. There's a point, she said, where you think you're disappearing. But you're not. You're just becoming visible to yourself in a new way. Something inside me shifted. Not dramatically, not like a movie epiphany. More like a knot loosening, one thread at a time. When she finished her coffee, she stood up, wrapped her mini scarf collection around her neck and said, "You'll breathe again. Don't rush it." Then she left, quietly, like she'd only come to deliver a message she'd been carrying for someone else. I stared at the empty chair long after she walked out. Somehow, a stranger had seen me more clearly than I'd seen myself in months. Running from myself. There's a special kind of exhaustion that comes from constantly dodging your own reflection. I spent weeks perfecting the art. If avoidance were a sport, I would have qualified for nationals. I walked faster, talked less, stayed busy, and convinced myself that motion meant progress. But deep down, I knew I wasn't moving forward. I was running laps around emotions that kept catching up like marathon champions. One afternoon, after another long day of pretending to be fine, I wandered through failed parkin', that massive park where dog owners look happier than most humans. I kept my eyes on the ground, watching my footsteps repeat the same pattern. Left, right, left. It felt symbolic in the most pathetic way. I wasn't walking. I was escaping in slow motion. There's a funny thing about running from yourself. You always know exactly where you are. I tried to distract myself with podcasts, music, even those 10 ways to fix your life videos that make you feel judged by a cheerful stranger. Nothing worked. My thoughts were faster, louder, and far less polite than anything I was listening to. I'd avoid mirrors too. Not because I disliked how I looked, but because mirrors tell the truth without permission. I caught my reflection once in a shop window, a quick, accidental glance. I looked tired, not the physical kind, but the kind of tired that sinks behind your eyes and stays there. And suddenly I felt ridiculous. Here I was, an adult in a perfectly safe country, running from feelings like they were wild animals. The worst part? The running made everything heavier. I avoided conversations with friends back home because I didn't want them asking, "How are you really?" I avoided new people in Denmark because small talk felt like walking a tightrope over my own doubts. I avoided stillness because silence had become a mirror too. One night, after hours of pacing my apartment like a malfunctioning Roomba, I realized something painfully obvious. You can't outrun someone who shares your heartbeat. I wasn't escaping. I was stretching the distance between who I was and who I was pretending to be. And the gap was starting to hurt. That was the night I finally stopped, not because I was brave, but because running had become more frightening than whatever I was avoiding. The letter I never sent. Sometimes the things we don't say speak the loudest. A few weeks after that park evening, I found myself scribbling a letter I never meant to mail. It was for someone I'd left behind long before moving to Denmark. Someone who had shaped the chapters of my story without ever realizing it. I wrote as if each word could release the tension I'd been carrying, anger, regret, longing, all tangled up into a single string of sentences. I remember sitting on my tiny balcony, the winter wind biting my cheeks, watching rooftops dusted with frost. I wrote things I'd rehearsed in my head for years, phrases I'd never had the courage to say out loud. I was scared. I was lost. I didn't know how to stay, and I didn't know how to leave. Writing felt strange, like spilling paint onto a canvas I wasn't sure I owned. The act of shaping my feelings into letters made them real in a way they had never been before. When I finished, I stared at the page. Part of me wanted to fold it neatly, address it, and send it off like an official apology or explanation. But another part, the part that had been hiding for months, whispered, "Some words are only meant to be seen by yourself." So I folded it anyway, tucked it into a drawer, and let it rest there. And yet, the moment I wrote it, something shifted. The weight that had clung to my chest for so long loosened, just slightly, like the first thaw of a stubborn winter. Writing that letter taught me an important truth. Closure isn't always about someone else acknowledging your words. Sometimes closure begins when you allow yourself to speak them, even if only to paper. Science shows that expressing emotions, through journaling, letters, or even whispering to yourself, reduces stress and helps your brain process complex feelings. I could feel it working, a quiet relief spreading through the knot in my chest. I never sent that letter, but I didn't need to. The act itself, the acknowledgement of my own experience, became a turning point. It didn't solve everything. The streets of Copenhagen were still cold, the silence still pressing. But for the first time in months, I could feel a small space inside me where hope wasn't entirely frozen. The last page moment. It happened on an ordinary afternoon, the kind that usually fades into background noise. The gray skies, the faint hum of trams, the soft shuffle of feet on cobblestones. I was sitting in a small cafe near Norrport, sipping lukewarm coffee, when I noticed a man across the room reading a book with a familiar spine. Something about the way he turned the pages carefully, deliberately, struck me. And in that moment it hit me. Every story deserves a last page, even mine that I realized I had spent months avoiding endings. Avoiding decisions, feelings, truths, because I was scared that closing one chapter meant losing something permanently. But here, witnessing someone else's immersion, I understood. Endings are not disappearances. They are punctuation marks, pauses that give your story shape and meaning. And maybe, just maybe, my own story wasn't over. Not yet. That I took a deep breath, letting the winter air seep into my lungs through the cafe door. The shadows of the streets outside seemed softer somehow, less accusing. For the first time in what felt like forever, I felt a gentle alignment between my inner chaos and the world outside. That alignment didn't fix everything, but it offered a small, crucial truth. My story was mine to write, and the last page wasn't predetermined. It was waiting for me to reach it. There was also a quiet thrill in knowing that no one else would ever tell this story the way I could. Copenhagen, with its ordered streets and hushed winters, had taught me patience, observation, and resilience. More importantly, it had given me the perspective to see that being present in the story, even when it's uncomfortable, was more valuable than fleeing it. I pulled out my notebook and scribbled a single line, as if testing the waters. Maybe the story is worth reading after all. It was simple, vulnerable, and somehow utterly freeing. That small act reminded me that the last page is not a point of arrival but an invitation to live, to observe, to continue, to share. The cafe smelled faintly of cinnamon rolls and roasted coffee beans, a comforting background to the quiet epiphany settling in my chest. I smiled, a real smile that didn't need anyone to notice. It was mine. My story was mine. And for the first time in months, I believed I could keep turning pages one at a time without fear. Is your story worth reading? Sometimes the hardest question we face isn't about the world. It's about ourselves. Is my story worth reading? Sitting in that quiet corner of Copenhagen, watching life move gently around me, I realized the answer isn't something someone else can give you. It's something you feel in the small, unguarded moments when no one is watching. The letter I never sent, the walks I took through frozen streets, the strangers who saw me. All of it led me to one truth. Yes, it is that I thought about the nights I almost gave up, the times I let fear and loneliness decide for me. I could easily have stayed small, hiding behind silence and self-doubt, pretending the story didn't matter. But stories aren't just about grand events or dramatic victories. They're about persistence, noticing the ordinary, and daring to acknowledge that even the messy, painful chapters are worth telling. That's the kind of story people remember. The one that whispers courage into their own hearts. I want you to pause here and ask yourself, what pages of your life are waiting to be read? The ones you're afraid to write, afraid to share, or maybe afraid to even admit exist. Every moment you resist living fully is a paragraph left blank. And every time you allow yourself to feel, reflect, or act, you're filling that blank page with meaning. The beauty of it is that your story doesn't need perfection. It just needs presence. I think back to the winter that froze me, the stranger who saw me, the letter that remained in my drawer. Each of those moments was a thread weaving the tapestry of my story, a story that, against all odds, became worth reading, not because it was flawless, but because it was lived. And that's what I want for you. Even if the streets feel too quiet, even if the nights feel too long, even if you feel invisible, your story is yours, and it deserves to be read. Remember this, the last page is never really the end. It's an invitation to keep writing, to keep turning pages, to keep noticing the ordinary moments that make your story remarkable. You may not see it yet, but someone, maybe even yourself, will find meaning in the words you've lived. And that alone makes every chapter worthwhile.